Although you got your heart hurt by the spear in my hands, it means that fear returns again. Home is the sailor, a seasickness, houseboat, fireplace. Home, 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 finally, never too late. Turn the porch light on, wait for the door to open. Ring it 3 times, 3 more, 3 verses to make. August and seal gear, never reports luck. Vampire hunter is coming home from the hills. She wouldn't kill the thrill of stillness, but chill and thistle, sadness and the whistle of queens. A literary crown, thorns perhaps explain that. Home is the sailor away from the sea. Now here is the hunter, an eternal soldier. Waves crashing, come home to me, come home. La 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 la, don't forget you near nothing. 4K on a shankor, love at sea for you and me. Agus and shell get over the bone knock. Hunters walking over the rocks, waterside shamrocks, wishing star luck planets. Yes, yes. Agus and yellow is the sailor. Home from the sea, away is the hunter. Home from the day, always I was I was always with you. Home from the hills, she wouldn't kill the thrill of stillness, but chill and thistle, sadness and the whistle of queens. Forever is the sailor, home from the sea, away is the hunter. Home from the day, always I was I was always with you, Come home to me, come home.
Here are some facts about the cornflower and its significance in Germany. Pretty cornflower is linked to Venus and Saturn. There are 2 Greek myths that center on the flower's supposed curative qualities against poisonous venoms. A nod to both myths is found in the flower's botanical name, Centaurea cyanus. Other uses. Dried cornflower petals are used in teas and other beverages, and the flower head is used in herbal medicine. Cornflower, also known as the Kornblume in German, is the national flower of Germany. In the 1800s, Wilhelm I, the Emperor of Prussia, made the cornflower his favorite flower and a symbol of the nation. Wilhelm later honored his mother by making the cornflower a symbol of unity in 1871, the year of Germany's unification. Home is the sailor, home from the sea, and the hunter, home from the hill. Inscribed on his grave, a requiem Stevenson himself penned, and the last 2 famous lines. Continuing the literary tradition, his cousin D.E. Stevenson was the Scottish author of romantic novels. In 1603, James VI, after acceding to the throne of England as James I, attempted to solve the problem once and for all by abolishing border law and even the very name of borders, in favor of middle shires. Although found from earliest times throughout Scotland, it was in the wild borderland bearers of the Stevenson name lived a particularly lawless life, in common with other border clans such as the Elliots, Douglases, Holmes, Swintons, Armstrongs, Maxwells, Johnstones, and Grahams. In an attempt to bring order to what was known as the debatable land on both sides of the border, that Alexander II of Scotland in 1237 signed the Treaty of York, for the first time established the Scottish border with England as a line running from the Solway to the Tweed. But this was not enough to curb what had become a state of near anarchy. Under border law, complaints from either side of the border were dealt with on truce days, while there was also a law known as the hot trot, that granted anyone who had their livestock stolen the right to pursue the thieves and recover their property within a certain time limit. later centuries, many of these Scots-Irish were forced through dire circumstance, not least the terrible 19th century Great Famine, to establish new lives for themselves in North America, Australia and New Zealand, and where their proud descendants thrive to this day. Strawberry roses. Ice-cold fact. People get upset when you are not exactly how they want you to be. But whose problem is that? Be yourself, gemstone.
Tops back up that black forest of hell. It's the moss of wood that led us into this dimension. Kimonos like a butterfly wings among the gardens of Japan. The blueberry scent is a perfume for insects. Rain clouds won't rain down on me, only vampires.
Are runes just an alphabet? Yes. Rune is a letter in a set of related alphabets, known as runic alphabets, native to the Germanic peoples. Runes survived longest in Scandinavia, where they were used in funerary inscriptions until the beginning of the 15th century. Runes were used to write Germanic languages before the adoption of the Latin alphabet. They were used for inscriptions of great importance, such as carving runestones to commemorate ancestors and mark the graves of heroes. The original runic alphabet, called Elder Futhark, had 24 letters. Younger Futhark, developed during the Viking Age, had 16 letters. The runic alphabet is named after its first 6 letters, which are F, U, TH, A, R, and K. Origin. Runes originated in Scandinavia around the time of Christ's birth. They were based on writing symbols, mainly Latin letters, used in the Mediterranean. Yes, runes are an alphabet. Pictish runes, aka an alphabet, a simple alphabet. Julius Caesar himself wrote in Book V of his Gallic Wars describing them as the pictorial people who pricked diverse marks into their skin. Of course, the most exciting thing about the ancient Picts is that they were heavily tattooed. Medieval sources report the existence of a Pictish language, and evidence shows that it was an insular Celtic language related to the Brittonic spoken by the Celtic Bretonsto the south. Pictish was gradually displaced by Middle Gaelic as part of the wider Gaelicization from the late 9th century. The serpent, the double disc and zirad, and the mirror and comb. Their territory is referred to as Pictland by modern historians. Some crosses were erected just outside churches and monasteries. Others at sites that may have marked boundaries or crossroads, or preceded churches. The term High Cross is mainly used in Ireland and Scotland, but the tradition across Britain and Ireland is essentially a single phenomenon, though there are certainly strong regional variations. The crosses often, though not always, feature a stone ring around the intersection, forming a Celtic cross. Illuminated manuscripts is very Gothic. Their relief decoration is a mixture of religious figures and sections of decoration such as knotwork, interlace, and in Britain vine scrolls, all in the styles also found in insular art in other media such as illuminated manuscripts and metalwork. There was a unique early medieval tradition in Ireland and Britain of raising large sculpted stone crosses, usually outdoors. A high cross or standing cross, Irish, cross ard/ardcroes, Scottish Gaelic, croy ard/ardcroys, Welsh, crows ucal/crows egoisig, is a freestanding Christian cross made of stone and often richly decorated. About 350 objects classified as Pictish stones have survived, the earlier examples of which holding by far the greatest number of surviving examples of the mysterious symbols, which have long intrigued scholars. The earlier stones have no parallels from the rest of the British Isles. but the later forms are variations within a wider insular tradition of monumental stones such as high crosses. Located in Scotland, mostly north of the Clyde Forth Line and on the eastern side of the country, these stones are the most visible remaining evidence of the Picts and are thought to date from the 6th to 9th century, a period during which the Picts became Christianized. A Pictish stone is a type of monumental stele, generally carved or incised with symbols or designs. A few have Ogham inscriptions. The Picts were a group of peoples in what is now Scotland north of the Firth of Forth, in the early Middle Ages. Where they lived and details of their culture can be gleaned from early medieval texts and Pictish stones. The Gaelic language was written, unlike Pictish, which may have made it a more powerful tool for the ruling class. The Gaelic language spread across much of the territory that would become Scotland. The Gaels and Picts merged to form the Kingdom of Alba in the 9th century. The Picts disappeared from history by the end of the first millennium. The Picts were the largest kingdom in Dark Age Scotland and repelled the conquests of the Romans and Angles. Picts, an Iron Age people who lived in the northern and eastern parts of Scotland. The Picts were originally tribal peoples who formed loose confederations, but later created two powerful kingdoms. The Romans called the Picts Picti, which means painted ones in Latin. Celtic people who spoke Gaelic and lived in the Gaelic-speaking kingdom of Dalriada. The Norse, Gaels, were a group of people who emerged during the Viking Age when Vikings intermarried with Gaels in Ireland and Scotland. The Gaels and Picts were two groups of people who played a key role in the history of early medieval Scotland. Scotland's recorded history begins with the arrival of the Romans around the 1st century, but the Kingdom of Scotland was not officially formed until the 9th century. Who were the first people to inhabit Scotland? The first recorded culture we have for Scotland comes from the Gaels and the Picts. Originally from Ireland, the Scots were a Gaelic race who settled out the Western Highlands from around the 3rd century, eventually moving their capital and. The recorded history of Scotland begins with the arrival of the Roman Empire in the 1st century. Scotland history, Scottish routes. Of the 8th century, the Viking invasions began, forcing the Picts and Gaels to cease their historic hostility to each other and to unite in the 9th century. In 843, Kenneth I Macalpine, King of Scots, becomes King of the Picts, thus uniting the two peoples under one crown, giving birth to the Kingdom of Scotland. Loss of culture and language. Colonialism can lead to the loss of language and culture. Systemic racism. Colonialism can lead to systemic racism, racial profiling, and xenophobia. Economic inequity. Colonialism can lead to economic underdevelopment, poor economic productivity, and economic exploitation. Human rights violations. Colonialism often involved policies that violated the human rights of colonized people, including slavery, apartheid, and mass murder. After the reign of King David I in the 12th century, the Scottish monarchs are best described as Scoto-Norman, preferring French culture to native Scottish culture. Scotland in the Middle Ages. After the arrival of the Vikings in the late 8th century, Scandinavian rulers and colonies were established along parts of the coasts and in the islands. In the 9th century, the Scots and Picts combined under the House of Alpin to form a single Kingdom of Alba, with a Pictish base and dominated by Gaelic culture. Cultural values. Colonization often involves the imposition of the colonizer's language and cultural values on the colonized people. Colonization is closely linked to the concept of imperialism, which is the use of power and influence to control another nation or people. Colonization can involve settling among and establishing control over indigenous people, and can often lead to the establishment of colonies.
Colonization is the process of a foreign group of people establishing control over a territory or people, often for the purpose of exploitation. You have no power in other people's stolen ideas and religion. Anderson was baptized on April 15, 1805, in St. Hans Church in Odense. Anderson was born in Odense, Denmark, on April 2, 1805. Anderson's stories have inspired ballets, plays, and animated and live-action films. His most famous fairy tales include The Emperor's New Clothes, The Little Mermaid, The Nightingale, The Steadfast Tin Soldier, The Red Shoes, The Princess and the Pea, The Snow Queen, The Ugly Duckling, The Little Match Girl, and Thumbelina. Anderson's fairy tales, consisting of 156 stories across 9 volumes, have been translated into more than 125 languages. They have become embedded in Western collective consciousness. Moth Moon Magazine X The Dark Ages Hans Christian Andersen /NDRSN/ANDRSN Danish April 2, 1805 to August 4, 1875, was a Danish author. Although a prolific writer of plays, travelogues, novels, and poems, he is best remembered for his literary fairy tales. Italian folktales, Calvino, Italo, Comp. Free download, borrow, and streaming. Internet Archive.org. In spite of its origins as a literary tale, related to the international cycle of animal as bridegroom or the search for the lost husband, human girl love a supernatural or enchanted one loses him must search for him. Similar stories have been collected from oral tradition in Italy. The Golden Root or the Golden Trunk Italian, Lo Terzo d'Oro, is a literary fairy tale written by Giambattista Basile in the Pentamerone, 4th story of the 5th day, one of 2 rewritings of the Greco-Roman myth of Cupid and Psyche by Basile, the other being Lo Catenaccio. In Germany, I held a meeting with Bundeskanzler Olaf Scholz. The Golden Root, Italian fairy tale. Italo Calvino published a collection of Italian folktales called Fiab Italiane in 1956. His work was intended to demonstrate the richness of Italian folk and fairy tales compared to the better-known traditions of Northern Europe. The Golden Root. This Italian fairy tale is similar to the Greek myth of Psyche's quest for Persephone's casket. Here are some Italian fairy tales and other Italian folklore. Dauntless Little John, also known as Giovanni Senza Paura or Fearless Giovannino. The man wreathed in seaweed, also known as Riviera di Ponente or L'Uomo Verde di Alghe. The ship with 3 decks, also known as Riviera di Ponente or Il Bastimento a Tre Piani. The man who came out only at night, also known as Riviera di Ponente or L'Uomo che assaiva solo di notte. Body without soul, also known as Riviera di Ponente or Corpo senza anima. Money can do everything, also known as Genoa or Il denaro fa tutto. The Little Shepherd, also known as Genoese hinterland or Il pastor che non cresceva mai. Silver Nose, also known as Lang or Naso di Argento. Cola Pesci, also known as Pesci Cola or Nicholas Fish. This is an Italian folktale about a merman. Swarovski's Spring-Summer 2024 campaign. It was an honor to recognize Army, soldiers and civilians who have made significant, positive impacts on our army, whether by implementing new policies, changing our systems and processes, or exhibiting our army's core values on a national stage through their heroic actions. Thank you for your dedicated, outstanding service to our army and the example you set. #BeAllYouCanBe. www.x.com/saykarmi. The Dark Ages is a term for the early Middle Ages, c. 5th to 10th centuries, or occasionally the entire Middle Ages, c. 5th to 15th centuries, in Western Europe after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, which characterizes it as marked by economic, intellectual, and cultural decline. Dark Ages. Historiography. Nevertheless, the Dark Ages remain a significant period in European history, one that has left a lasting mark on the continent. 150. Over the course of 250 years, Rome's population dropped from about 65 million to 50 million. Some people believe this was because of a global cold front that swept the earth. 300. The Romans slowly lost their control of the empire as other, stronger groups moved through the area. There were many battles, and the Romans were defeated. 400. As the Roman Empire fell apart, the new groups of people scattered across the land. They were uneducated people who spoke different languages, and they replaced the more civilized Romans. 500. In spite of the fighting going on around Western Europe, the Byzantine Empire continued to hold their land for another 200 years. The Dark Ages is a designation for the medieval period, usually in a derogatory sense. In its widest application, the term embraces the epoch from the 6th to the 15th centuries. Illuminated manuscripts from the Dark Ages and Gothic periods are fascinating works of art and history. These manuscripts are handwritten books that have been decorated with gold or silver, brilliant colors, and elaborate designs or miniature pictures. They were primarily produced in Western Europe between the 6th and 16th centuries. During the Gothic period, roughly the 12th to 16th centuries, illuminated manuscripts often featured intricate and ornate designs. The Gothic style is characterized by its use of pointed arches, detailed and elaborate decorations, and a focus on verticality and light. This style was reflected in the manuscripts through the use of elaborate borders, decorated initials, and miniature illustrations that often depicted religious scenes. One of the most impressive Gothic illuminated manuscripts is the Codex Argentius, Silver Book, a 6th century manuscript that contains a translation of the Bible into the Gothic language. Another notable example is the Book of Hours, which was a popular type of illuminated manuscript during this period. These books contained prayers to be recited at specific times of the day and were often richly decorated. The creation of these manuscripts was a labor-intensive process, typically carried out by monks in monasteries. They used materials like parchment or vellum for the pages and gold leaf for the illumination. The detailed work required a high level of skill and could take months or even years to complete. Illuminated manuscript books. French illuminated manuscripts. Illuminated manuscript pages. Illuminated manuscript examples. Illuminated manuscript art. Gothic manuscript illumination. Illuminated manuscript nativity. Simple illuminated manuscript. Miniature illuminated manuscript. Illuminated manuscripts continued to be produced in the early 16th century, but in much smaller numbers, mostly for the very wealthy. The earliest illuminated manuscripts in existence come from the Kingdom of the Ostrogoths and the Eastern Roman Empire and date from between 400 and 600 CE. Illuminated manuscripts were handmade books, usually on Christian scripture or practice, produced in Western Europe between c. 500 c. 1600. Illuminated manuscripts from the Dark Ages Gothic.
Illuminated manuscripts are, as their name suggests, handmade books illumined by gold and silver ink. They were produced in Western Europe between c. 500 c. 1600 CE, and their subject matter is usually Christian scripture, practice, and lore. The books are elaborately illustrated, and their illumination comes from the use of brightly colored inks painted on top of or ornamented by gold and silver ink. Even though many manuscripts from the medieval period are often referred to as illuminated, the term technically applies only to those which make use of gold and silver ink. The fragments of a manuscript of Virgil's works, for example, is often included in a discussion of illuminated manuscripts but does not technically meet the standard definition. The most popular type of illuminated manuscript was the Book of Hours, which was comprised of Christian prayers to be said at certain hours throughout the day. Some of these are the most impressive works of their periods, elaborately decorated with intricate illustrations and lavishly illumined. More of these books have survived than any other because the demand for them was greater and so more were produced on commission. Other types of illuminated manuscripts were copies of the Bible or just the four Gospels, bestiaries, prayer books, biblical tales, and those which dealt with classical writers such as Virgil or Homer. These manuscripts were produced by monks in monasteries, abbeys, and priories and were quite costly because they took so long to make. Only people of substantial means were able to afford to commission them. In time, nuns also began producing the manuscripts in their nunneries, and, as literacy grew and books became more popular, professional bookmakers became involved in order to meet the growing demand. The invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg in c. 1440 CE marked the beginning of the end of handmade, illuminated books, but they remained popular among the wealthy, and some collectors, in fact, disdained printed books and continued to commission handmade works. Even though Gutenberg's press made books less costly and more available, it took about 20 years for print books to become a profitable venture. Gutenberg himself, in fact, never profited from the invention. His press was seized for debt shortly after its invention, and any profits were made by his patron Johann Fust, who perfected Gutenberg's techniques and popularized the printed word. Some of the most impressive illuminated manuscripts were actually created after Gutenberg's invention and continued to be produced into the 17th century CE. Although there are many fine works, from the beginning of their production onwards, which are considered great works of art, the following are among those considered the greatest. They are listed in order of date of composition. The greatest illuminated manuscripts. The Book of Deo, 650 to 700 CE. The oldest illuminated book of the Gospels created either at Iona or Lindisfarne Abbey. The book contains a number of striking illustrations, and the carpet pages de Hamel makes note of are often adorned by intricate Celtic knot motifs entwined with animal imagery. The book was most likely used by missionaries as it is slim and, as de Hamel observes, could easily slip into a traveler's saddle pack. The work marks the first appearance of the evangelists in illuminated manuscripts as well as the earliest known use of gold and silver ink to illumine the Gospels. Codex Amiatinus, c. late 7th to early 8th century CE, the oldest version of St. Jerome's Vulgate Bible. It was created in Northumbria, Britain, of 1040 sheets of fine vellum. The biblical narratives are illustrated by striking images brightly colored. Lindisfarne Gospels, c. 700 to 715 CE, created at the Lindisfarne Priory on the Holy Island, off the coast of Northumberland, Britain.
The mythology of Britain's wildflowers. Vincent van Gogh Wheatfield with cornflowers. L'œuvre de Vincent van Gogh, catalogue raisonné. The works of Vincent van Gogh. His paintings and drawings are wildflowers are deeply rooted in ancient folklore and stories. Folklore of the Low Countries, often just referred to as Dutch folklore, includes the epics, legends, fairy tales, and oral traditions of the people of Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Traditionally, this folklore is written or spoken in Dutch or in one of the regional languages of these countries. Many folk tales are derived from pre-Christian Gaulish and Germanic culture. As such, many are similar to French and German versions. In 1891, schoolteacher Jules Lemoyne and folklorist Auguste Guity published folk tales from the Walloon country. They focused on strictly transcribing and translating tales from original Walloon manuscripts, mostly from Hainaut and Namur. In 1918, William Elliot Griffiths published Dutch fairy tales for young folks. This was followed in 1919 by Belgian fairy tales. Also in 1918, Belgian writer Jean de Bastière published Folk Tales of Flanders, published in English as Beasts and Men. The Belgian tale Karl Katz is similar to both the German folk tale Peter Klaus and Washington Irving's Rip Van Winkle. Charles Dillon was a French writer, born near the Belgian border. He wrote stories based on the folk tales of the countryside. The Nettle Spinner is a Flemish fairy tale later included in Andrew Lang's 1890 The Red Fairy Book. Some cultures believe that hidden in the forms of flowers are geometric patterns relating to the mathematical laws which govern the universe, natural cycles, and astrological activity. In the British Isles, it's often archetypes of Roman, Greek, Celtic, and Norse gods and goddesses or biblical stories associated with planets and times of year which characterize the plants and animate their properties. Poppies were, along with wheat, the emblem of the Greek mother goddess Demeter, who presided over agriculture and the fertility of the earth. Associated with the fullness of the moon, she took care of the growing of crops, and poppies put vital nutrients back into the soil. In one myth, Demeter was not able to sleep looking for her daughter Persephone. She drank a concoction of poppy to help her rest so that her attention could return to the nourishing of the fields. The Greek word mekon means poppy and is also the name of a youth beloved of Demeter who died and was transformed into a poppy flower. In festivals celebrating Demeter, a cake of poppy seeds was offered in reverence of the harvest, and the flowers were worn by her priestesses. Some old stories reflect the Celtic belief in the sacredness of trees. Citation needed. The oak as a venerable tree is a theme seen in the stories. In The Princess with 20 Petticoats, a wise old oak counsels the king. In the legend of the wooden shoe, another consoles a carpenter. Dutch folk tales from the Middle Ages are strong on tales about flooded cities and the sea. Legends surround the sunken cities lost to epic floods in the Netherlands. From St. Elizabeth's flood of 1421, comes the legend of Kinderdyk that a baby and a cat were found floating in a cradle after the city flooded, the cat keeping the cradle from tipping over. They were the only survivors of the flood. Town of Kinderdyk is named for the place where the cradle came ashore. The story is told in The Cat and the Cradle. The Sefting legend says that once glorious city was flooded and ruined by seawaters due to the All Saints flood, that was flooded in 1584, due to a mermaid being captured and mistreated, and mentions the bell tower still rings. This is much like the story The Mermaid of Westenshawen or Westenshawen, which also concerns the mistreated mermaid, followed by a curse and flood. In some flood legends, the church bells or clock bells of sunken cities still can be heard ringing underwater. It is an illustrated edition of the Gospels of the New Testament made in honor of the Priory's most famous member, St. Cuthbert, and dedicated to the glory of God. Priory was sacked by the Vikings in 793 CE, the first recorded Viking raid on Britain, but the book was somehow saved and moved to Durham, away from the coast, for safety. The Book of Kells, c. 800 CE, created either at Iona Abbey, Scotland, and brought to Kells, Ireland, in 806 CE, or made at Kells. This is the most famous illuminated manuscript. The work is commonly regarded as the greatest illuminated manuscript of any era. St. Albans Psalter, circa 1120 to c. 1145 CE, created at St. Albans Abbey in Britain. This is a lavishly illustrated and illuminated book of songs and literature. The Morgan Crusader Bible, circa 1250, created in Paris and most likely for Louis IX, 1214 to 1270 CE, who participated in the 7th and 8th Crusades and died of dysentery at the start of the 8th. The Morgan Crusader Bible was originally a work only of full-color illustrations, but later owners seem to have felt compelled to add text to complement the images. This practice is the complete reverse of how illuminated manuscripts were usually created, where the text was written first and then handed to an artist to illustrate and illuminated to adorn. The Westminster Abbey Bestiary, circa 1275 to 1290 CE, created most likely in York, Britain. A bestiary is a book of animals, real or imaginary, defined and accompanied by illustrations. This genre originated in Greece in the 2nd century CE, but was most popular during the Middle Ages when a number of them were produced to show a correlation between the natural world and the Christian vision of the Bible. The Book of Hours of Jean d'Avreux, circa 1324 to 1328 CE, created in Paris, France by the leading illustrator of the time, Jean Pucelle, for the Queen Jean d'Avreux 1310 to 1371 CE, wife of Charles IV, 1322 to 1328 CE. It is an amazing artistic masterpiece of 25 full-page paintings representing the life of Jesus Christ, as well as a number of smaller illustrations, totaling over 700. Text, of course, presents the prayers a faithful Christian would recite throughout the day, and the illustrations are intended to inspire and elevate the reader. The Black Hours, circa 1475 to 1480 CE, created in Bruges, Belgium by an anonymous artist working in the style of the leading illustrator of the city, Wilhelm Vreeland, who dominated the art c. 1450 CE until his death in 1481 CE. It is made of fine vellum which was carefully processed, stained black, and then illuminated in brilliant, almost mesmerizing blue and gold. The images in blue and lighter colors are highlighted by the deep black of the background, and the whole work gives a reader the impression of entering another realm. Les Traces Riches Ars du Duc de Berry, circa 1412 to 1416 and 1485 to 1489 CE. Even though the Black Hours is recognized and admired for its unique qualities, Les Traces Riches Ars is the most famous book of hours in the present day. It is regularly referenced as an absolute masterwork. The book was commissioned by Jean, Duke of Berry, Count of Poitiers, France, 1340 to 1416 CE. It was left unfinished when the Duke, as well as the artists working on it, died of the plague in 1416 CE. The manuscript was discovered and completed between the years 1485 to 1489 CE. It is often referenced as the king of illuminated manuscripts because of the incredible grandeur of the miniatures and the obvious artistic skill required to create it. The work contains other images such as landscapes of the time, domestic scenes, a plan of Rome, and others not associated with biblical stories. Grimani Breviary, circa 1510 CE. This work is nearly legendary for its length and the beauty of the artwork. The book is comprised of 1,670 pages with full-page illustrations of scenes from the Bible, secular legend, and contemporary landscapes along with domestic scenes. Text is biblical in nature and includes prayers, psalms, and other selections from the Bible. It was probably made in Flanders, but who created or commissioned it is unknown. The book was bought by the Venetian Cardinal Domenico Grimani, 1461 to 1523 CE, in 1520 CE, who declared it so beautiful that only select people of high moral standing should be allowed to see it, and then only under special circumstances. In his will, Grimani stipulated that the book could never be sold and left it to Venice. Prayer Book of Claude de France, circa 1517 CE, created for Claude, the Queen of France, 1514 to 1524 CE, along with an almost equally impressive Book of Hours. This work is one of the most unique illuminated manuscripts owing to its size, small enough to fit in the palm of one's hand.
Alles eingeholt in einen Feiertag. Come for puppy bread, run by traditional circle, you and more flower, dinner, last supper, condiments, pine nuts, all caught up on a holiday. Flowers in the sand, tagged by electric handcuffs, more the brick into an ash cloak. American in this dreamland, 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 dreamland. Flowers in the sand, God's hold our hands.